Hello everyone and welcome back to another video where I talk about my vinyl collection. It's been a while since I've made a video like this, but now I found the time to keep up with the series a little bit. So here we go, without further ado. This is the first one I have to show you right there, which is a 7-inch. The first 7-inch I got in my collection, and that is the self-titled Otto Spinetta. Now, if you have seen the very first video where I talked about my vinyl collection, the very first album I bought was the second self-titled Otto Spinetta, and so the first Otto Spinetta was the first full-length album that I got in my vinyl collection, and this one is the first 7-inch that I got in my collection, which is also Otto Spinetta, and this one is a really short one that is definitely worth it. There are two songs over here which have never been released before, and the first one, Από την άκρη της νύχτας, is kind of decent, but the second one, Ο Άρωτος Άνθρωπος, which was played live at Πρώτος Όροφος Θεσσαλονίκη, was an incredible track. In my opinion, this is quite worth it. It's another really dark, sort of experimental dark wave project from Greece, and these two tracks are also quite sad, quite melancholic. They have a really dark and dystopian feel to it, and it's definitely worth it. Go and check out Otto Spinetta, all of their works actually. They don't have a big discography, they just have two full-length albums and the 7-inch, and all of them in my opinion are quite worth it. The next album in my collection is Filth by Swans, which I got it when I saw Swans live. That was an experience, that's for sure, and I didn't get earbuds for the live, but thankfully there were people in the entrance that were giving to the audience earbuds for free, and I'm glad I got them because their live show was really wild and really loud. And so not only the show was incredible, but in my opinion, this live had probably the best merch table I've ever seen in any live show. There were lots of different releases from Swans. There were t-shirts, there were bags, and they were all in great prices. And I got this repress over here of their very first album for just about 15 euros. It was really cheap and it was definitely worth it. I also got To Be Kind in double CD and with a bonus live DVD, and I also got a Swans t-shirt. All of them were quite cheap. And now what can I say about the first one's album which hasn't been said already? This is definitely one of the most innovative albums. It's so ahead of its time. It's not that much the fact that it's one of the first no-wave albums, but this one had such an extreme and such a brutal sound for its time that was quite disturbing, and as the title says, it was really filthy. And the more I listen to this album, the more of a grower it becomes. I truly love this album and it instantly goes to be one of my favorite works from Swans, hands down. And the great thing about the repress is that they have these two paper posters over here, which are kind of big ones, which are two posters from two of their shows back in like 1983, and this is a really nice touch and a really nice throwback to a time and period that I haven't lived, but it's definitely a really nice addition to the whole album. Swans Filth, one of my favorite projects they've done, really ahead of its time, really eventful, really aggressive sound, and yeah, that's about it. There are not that many things to say other than that about Swans' legacy, especially with their first album. Next one is one of the most aggressive but also one of the saddest and the most melancholic power electronics albums I've ever heard in my life, and this is Pleasure Ground by Prurient, a 4-track double LP which is just sheer torture music. Definitely one of my favorite works from Prurient, if not my favorite one, and also easily one of my favorite power electronics works of all time. I also love the gatefold on this thing, it's really amazing. It's about your standard black vinyl The pressing on this is quite decent. Obviously, we're talking about a Hospital Productions release, the label from Prurient. It was definitely one of the more expensive albums I got, if I can recall, but we're talking about a quite rare release, which when at first came onto a double cassette box, it was extremely limited and extremely expensive. So I'm really glad I got this, because this is easily one of my favorite works from power electronics in general. I really love this album because it has such a sad and melancholic tone to it that you don't typically find in a power electronics album, but the dark aesthetic to it is so heavily emotional, it's so devastating. I haven't found that many albums, even in the Prurient catalog, that would be as devastating and as dark as this. This is highly aggressive at times. On other occasions, it feels like a really loud ambient album. There are lots of different phases with these 4 tracks, making it some of my favorite works of all time, especially in this more underground sort of genre. Definitely go and give a listen to Pleasure Grounds, especially if you have heard some of the more well-known works from Prurient. If you want to get further into his discography, in my opinion, this is one of the albums you must check out. The next 3 I'm going to show you right now, I got them on a vinyl bazaar the same day. So the first one I'm going to show you is Moaning by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, also known as the self-titled one, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, as it's titled over here. There's no Moaning title in this album. So what we have here is easily one of the most important jazz albums of all time. This one is a more recent repress that I got quite cheap. It's your standard black vinyl. It's one of those hard pop albums that if you haven't heard already, then you definitely need to check out. It's definitely one of the most important and one of the most essential works in jazz music, especially if you're looking for something really energetic. This is the album for you. Next one is one of my favorite albums of all time period. I love this album since I was a child. It's still one of my favorite albums up to this date, and I never got that on a physical release, so this time had come and there it is. This is Blue Lines by Massive Attack. One of my favorite albums, not only for trip hop standards but in general. This album is such a huge inspiration on me. The vocals, the production on this thing, anything about it is incredible from start to finish. And even though a lot of people might say that Mezzanine was their best work, I have to disagree. I grew up with this album and I haven't found anything, not only from Massive Attack but from other artists in the genre, that manages to grab the aesthetic on this one. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is probably a bootleg release. Now, back in the day when I bought this album, I had no idea about bootlegs. So yeah, it was a really cheap album. I got it for about 15 euros, I think, so even cheaper than that. And I mean, the sound of it, it's okay. Yeah, the pressing is not something special, but by far the biggest bummer is that the vinyl has a bit of a scratch over here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's from the very first track, Safe from Harm, that for a couple of seconds it might have a scratching noise looping through it. And yeah, if I was aware of bootlegs, I wouldn't buy this thing, but you know, for what it is, it's still an album that I've heard tons of times, so I don't necessarily regret for buying this. It's just that with bootlegs you don't support the artist directly, but you know, mistakes were made. It's still not something that I'm just ashamed of. It's just a thing that I just got a bit more cautious as time flies. And then the next one I got was also a bootleg, but this was a truly exceptional one and I got it on a really good price, and I would never imagine that I would find this album, but here it is. It's 10,000 Days by Tool. Yeah, this is a bootleg because back at the time it never got released on vinyl. I don't think it ever did, or if it did, it's probably really expensive and sold out right now. So this album was released into multiple bootleg releases, and I got that completely blind without, like I said, knowing what a bootleg is. To my surprise, this album comes on a really nice red vinyl with a few black spots here and there. I mean, the vinyl is really beautiful. Now, the thing with this album is that I think the sound of this thing is incredible. It has a fantastic sound. The production on this thing sounds great on vinyl. The issue is that the album itself, the pressing, it has lots of pops and crackles throughout the entire album. On the louder ones, it's not that much of a big deal, but yeah, this is an album that I don't usually put on my turntable a lot of times because of that reason. But like I said, it's an album that I've listened to tons of times before buying the vinyl record. But Tool is definitely one of my favorite bands of all time. I think that 10,000 Days is an amazing album. There are some fantastic ideas of this thing, and even though it's not their most unique or their most innovative album, I would say that this one is by far their saddest and most depressing one. And with that being said, that's all for today. What's your opinion on this album? So if you have heard of them, like them, dislike them, why? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.